The train pulled away, and Elena stood frozen on that dusty platform, watching the man she'd traveled 2,000 miles to marry, tear her photograph in half, and walk away without a single word. The whole town saw it. The whispers started immediately. "Sometimes the goods don't match the advertisement," one woman sneered. Elena had nothing. No money for a ticket home. No family to wire, no place to go. She was a mail-order bride that nobody wanted. But then a stranger stepped forward, a quiet rancher with storm-gray eyes and a motherless little girl hiding behind his leg. He wasn't offering love. He wasn't offering marriage. He was offering work and a roof over her head. What Elena didn't know was that his late wife had once stood on this very same platform, just as lost, just as alone. And what he didn't know was that the woman everyone called damaged goods was about to save his daughter's life and heal a heart he thought would never feel again.
This story proves that rejection is not the end of your story. It's often the beginning of something better than you ever planned. The people who see your worth when you're at rock bottom, those are the ones who deserve your whole heart. If you've ever felt discarded or overlooked, this story is for you. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had a worst day that turned into your biggest blessing? Share this with someone who needs hope today. And subscribe, because stories like this remind us that second chances are real. The train pulled away, leaving Elena stranded on the platform. The torn pieces of her photograph lay in the dust at her feet. She had pictured this moment 100 times on her long journey from Philadelphia. She had braced herself for a man who might be quiet or even a little rough around the edges. But she never imagined this. A public dismissal so cold and complete, it stole the very air from her lungs. A woman's sharp voice cut through the silence. "Well, I reckon that settles that." Elena turned, her legs unsteady beneath the gray traveling dress she had saved for this very day. A woman in a fancy green dress fanned herself, her eyes glinting with a mean sort of curiosity. "Thomas Garrett knows what he wants," the woman said to the few folk still watching. "These mail-order deals are always a risk. Sometimes the goods don't match the advertisement." The words hit Elena like rocks. She felt a hot blush creep up her neck. She wanted to shout that the picture was honest, that she was who she said she was, but her throat was tight with unshed tears and the words just wouldn't come out. "That's enough, Martha," an older man in a shopkeeper's apron said kindly. He looked at Elena with real sympathy. "Miss, is there any family we can send a wire to for train fare?" The man's kindness almost broke her. Elena just shook her head. There was nobody. Her folks were gone, and her aunt had made it clear she was just another mouth to feed. The advertisement for a husband out west had felt like her only way out. "I have a little money," she finally whispered, her voice feeling like it belonged to a stranger. "Is there a boarding house?" "It's full up," Martha snapped, clicking her fan shut. "Miners took every last room. Besides, it's not proper for a young woman to be on her own here." The small crowd started to drift away, leaving Elena to face her disaster alone under the heavy sun. Her travel bag, holding everything she owned in the world, suddenly felt like it was filled with stones. She bent down and picked up the 2 pieces of her photograph. The girl in the picture looked so full of hope, so foolish. "The evening train heads back east at 6 o'clock, the shopkeeper Henry suggested gently. "Mr. Garrett made his choice, Henry," Martha said, her voice a loud whisper. "The girl wasn't honest. Just look at her. She's bigger than she looked in that picture." "I have not gained any weight," Elena said, her voice quiet but firm. A little spark of anger finally broke through her shock. "The photograph is an honest one." Martha just raised her eyebrows. "That may be what you think, dear, but a man expects to get what he paid for." "And what is that?" Elena shot back. "A piece of property he can send back if it's not to his liking?" Henry, the shopkeeper, shifted on his feet, looking uncomfortable. Elena knew right away she'd said the wrong thing. In this town, she had no right to be angry. She was just the woman who wasn't wanted.
"I'm sorry," she said, the words feeling like dust in her mouth. "I'm not myself." "Of course," Henry said, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. "But miss, that evening train is your best bet." "I don't have the money for a ticket back," she admitted, the last of her pride crumbling away. A heavy silence fell over the platform. Martha huffed and walked off, done with the whole affair. Henry looked truly troubled. "Mrs. Chen at the restaurant might need a dishwasher," he offered. "Or the hotel, perhaps. It wouldn't be much, but it'd be a start." "The hotel won't take her," Martha called back from the edge of the platform. "Catherine won't hire a woman with a story like this attached to her. The whole town will be talking by supper time, and you know it." She was right. In a town this small, a scandal was the biggest news you could get. By nightfall, everyone would know her as the mail-order bride who got sent packing right on the platform. Just then, a man and a little girl appeared at the far end of the station. The man walked with a long, easy stride, and the little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, held his hand tightly. He stopped and took in the whole sad scene with a pair of sharp eyes. He saw Elena standing there with her bag and her torn picture. He saw Henry's worried face, and he saw the shame that hung in the air like dust after a storm. "Afternoon, Henry," a voice rumbled, rough like it was more used to calling cattle than talking to townsfolk. "Is the train running on time?" It was a man named Caleb. The station master, Henry, looked relieved. "Yes, it sure was. Just made its drop-off." He faltered, not quite knowing how to explain the woman left behind on his platform. "I can see that," Caleb said, his gaze falling on Elena. His eyes were gray as a storm cloud and set in a face carved by the sun and wind. He looked to be about 35, a man who built his life with his hands, not with a smile. Beside him, a little girl with her daddy's gray eyes peeked around his leg. "Papa, is that lady fixin' to cry?" she whispered loud enough for the world to hear. Elena felt the sting of tears and quickly turned away, pretending to fix her bag. The wooden planks of the platform suddenly felt unsteady beneath her feet. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to, and her spirit felt as torn as the photograph of the man who had just walked away. She had to leave, but there was nowhere to run to. The sun was sinking low, but the day's heat still hung heavy in the air. "Hold on a minute, miss," Caleb's voice stopped her cold. "Henry, what in the world happened here?" Henry told him the short, ugly version of the story. A mail-order bride, a cold rejection, and a woman left with nothing. Through it all, Caleb's face was a stone mask, but his shoulders squared up. "Thomas Garrett did this?" he asked when Henry finished. "Well, he has every right to refuse," Henry stammered. "I ain't askin' about his rights. I'm askin' if he left a woman stranded without a penny to her name." Caleb's voice had dropped to a low growl that was more threatening than any shout. "Where is he now?" "Caleb, don't you go startin' trouble," Henry warned. "The hell it ain't my concern," Caleb shot back. He looked at Elena taking in her worn bag and the torn photograph she was still clutching. "Ma'am, do you have any skills? Can you cook a meal or tend to a house?" The question caught her off guard. "Yes," she managed to say. "I kept house for my aunt. I can cook simple food. And I know how to look after chickens." "My daughter and I live about 5 miles south of here," Caleb stated plainly. "I run cattle, a few horses, and a vegetable garden that's mostly weeds. My wife passed on 2 years ago." He said it like a fact, with no pity. "I could use the help. You could use a roof over your head. A temporary thing till you sort yourself out." Henry sputtered, "Caleb, you can't. People will talk. A single woman at your ranch." "Let 'em talk," Caleb said, his jaw tight. "They're already talking about what happened here. At least this way she'll be safe while they run their mouths." Elena's head was spinning. This man wasn't offering charity. He was offering a trade, work for shelter. It was a deal that let her keep her dignity. "I would work hard," she heard herself say. "I promise I would not be a burden." "I didn't figure you would be," he said, his expression softening just a bit. "But it's hard country out there. The work never stops, and the house needs more than I can give. And Mia, he glanced down at his daughter, she needs a woman's touch. Things a man like me just don't know how to give. Mia tugged on his pants. Is the lady coming home with us, Papa? That's up to the lady, little bird. They both looked at her, the quiet rancher and his curious little girl. Elena knew this was a crossroads. She could wait for another, better offer that might never come, or she could take this stranger's hand. Pride was a luxury she just could not afford anymore. I'll come, she said softly, and I will earn my keep. Caleb gave a single nod, like they'd just sealed a cattle deal. Wagon's just down the way. We'll get you settled in before dark. As they walked, little Mia slipped her small, warm hand right into Elena's. The simple, trusting gesture cracked open the wall of fear around Elena's heart. Behind them, Henry was still calling out warnings, but his voice faded as they left the platform and the scene of her humiliation behind them. They were walking toward a future she could not even begin to imagine. The wagon was plain and built for work. Caleb lifted Mia into the back, then turned and offered Elena a hand up. His touch was brief and businesslike, but it was a kindness she hadn't felt in a long, long time. Thank you, she said, settling onto the hard wooden seat, for not leaving me there. Caleb took up the reins. A man who'd leave a woman like that ain't a man at all. Thomas Garrett just showed this whole town what he's made of, and it ain't much. As they rolled out of town, the setting sun painted the sky in gold and orange. Elena watched the place where her dreams had died shrink into the distance. She thought of Caleb's quiet anger, of Mia's small hand in hers, and felt a tiny spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, the worst day of her life had opened a door to something better. The road took them through wide-open country that smelled of dust and sagebrush. Mia chattered from the back of the wagon about her chickens and a horse named Clover. And while Caleb drove in silence, Elena knew he was listening to every single word, daughter's words with a deep appreciation. He knew how precious they were. My little girl Mia piped up saying, "We had a lady helping out for a spell, Mrs. Patterson. She left, though, said Papa was too quiet and this whole ranch was just too lonesome." Caleb's voice held a gentle warning, but you could hear he'd already given up. He knew his daughter spoke her mind, no matter what. "It is true, Papa. She said you never talked much, and all there was to do out here was work." Mia then popped her head right between Elena and Caleb. "Are you going to leave us too?" The question was so honest, so full of worry, it made Elena's throat feel tight. "I cannot say what tomorrow brings," she answered carefully. "But I am here right now, and I promise to work my hardest for as long as I am." It was the truest thing she could say. Mia seemed to find that acceptable. She snuggled back into the wagon, humming a little tune that the hot wind carried away. They rode on in silence for a good while. The only sounds were the groaning of the wagon wheels and the steady clop of the horses' hooves. Elena could feel the last of her fight just drain away, leaving an exhaustion so deep it felt like a chore just to sit up straight. "You will have your own room," Caleb finally said, breaking the quiet. "It is not much. It used to be for storage, but it has a window and a good bed. You will eat your meals with us. Most days the work is from sunrise to sundown. You get Sundays off, mostly." He was laying out the terms plain and simple, making it clear this was a job. Elena was grateful for that. After the mess of a day she had, simple and direct was a comfort. "That sounds more than fair," she told him. "It is what is right." Caleb gave her a quick look, then turned his eyes back to the road. "I will not have folks saying I took advantage of your situation. You work, you get a roof over your head and food on the table. We can talk about wages after I see what you can do. Is that agreeable?" "Yes." After another quiet spell, Caleb spoke about what happened with Garrett. His jaw was tight, like he was choosing his words with great care. "What that man did was just plain cruel. It had nothing to do with you and everything to do with him being a small-minded man. I want you to know that." His unexpected kindness almost made her fall apart. Elena just stared straight ahead, fighting back tears. "He looked at me like I was some livestock that was not up to snuff," she said,
her voice barely a whisper. Then he is a fool, Caleb said simply, like it was a fact. A woman's worth is not found in a pretty face. It is in her character and in her grit. And what she does when things get tough. He paused for a moment. You stood up on that platform with everyone staring. You had no money and no prospects, but you did not break. That tells me a whole lot more about you than any picture ever could. The tears came then, but she let them fall without a sound. These were not tears of shame. They were tears of relief, like a heavy weight had been lifted off her shoulders. Mia started singing again from the back of the wagon, a sweet little song about mockingbirds. The sun dipped lower, painting the plains in deep shades of gold. And Elena Cross, who started her day thinking she would be a wife, cried for the life she lost, while riding toward a new one she could not even imagine. The ranch came into view just as the sun kissed the mountains. It was a cluster of buildings that looked like they had seen some weather but were built to last. The main house was bigger than she thought, 2 stories made of dark wood with a porch that wrapped all the way around. A big barn stood off to the side with a corral and a few smaller buildings nearby. As they got closer, Elena saw the signs of a place where one man was trying to do the work of 3. There were fences that needed mending and some weeds getting friendly with the garden. But you could also see the care he put into it. The barn was in good shape and the animals looked healthy. It felt like a working ranch, not a forgotten one. Caleb stopped the wagon near the house and helped Mia down, then Elena. The little girl took off for the barn, yelling hello to the horses. Caleb watched her with a look of pure love mixed with worry, like he was never quite sure he was doing right by her. Come on, he said, grabbing Elena's bag. Let me show you around. Inside, the house was cool and dim. Elena's eyes adjusted to see a large room that was both the kitchen and the living space. A big stone fireplace took up one wall, surrounded by simple, sturdy furniture. Everything was clean but very basic. There were no curtains on the windows or rugs on the floor. It was a house, but it was not yet a home. The kitchen is over there, Caleb pointed. There is a pump out back for water. The pantry is stocked up well enough, though I am no cook. He led her up a narrow staircase. 3 doors opened onto a small hallway. Mia's room, my room, and this one here. He opened the 3rd door to a small room with a single bed, a dresser, and a window looking out at the mountains. It is not much, but it is yours. Elena walked in and put her bag on the bed. The room was tiny, but it had a real glass window and a door that closed. That was more privacy than she had ever had before. It is perfect, she said softly. Thank you. When she looked back, Caleb was watching her. You have had one heck of a day, he said. Why do you not get settled in? I will call you for supper. But Elena shook her head. I would rather work if you do not mind. I think I need to do something useful right now. A look of understanding crossed his face, and he nodded. All right, then. Let us start with supper. They went back downstairs, and Elena looked over the kitchen. The basics were all there. She tied on an apron and got to work, pulling out pots and pans. She knew she could make something good here. What she needed. Caleb leaned against the doorframe, just watching. You know what you are doing, he said. It was not a question. I kept house for my aunt and her family. 7 people in all, and every one of them was particular about their food. Elena sliced salt pork with a steady hand. I learned young that if you want a little peace, you better make sure the meal is a good one. Your aunt, she treated you well then. The words were casual, but Elena felt the meaning behind them. She could lie, smooth it all over with talk about family duty. But this man was straight as an arrow, and he deserved the same back. She gave me a place to live after my parents died. I am grateful for that. But no, she did not treat me well. I was convenient, another pair of hands to mind the children and do the washing. I was told to disappear when company came, because being a poor relation reflected badly. The words tasted more bitter than she meant them to. Elena focused on the pork, cutting it into perfect little squares. So, you took the first way out you could find, Caleb said softly. Even if it meant marrying a stranger. Even if it meant that. Elena moved to the stove. I thought it would be a fresh start, a chance to matter to someone. And instead, you got Thomas Garrett. Instead, I got humiliated in front of half the town. Elena's hands stopped moving. Do you know him, Garrett? Well enough to know you are better off without him. Caleb's voice went hard again. He runs the feed store and thinks mighty highly of himself. Word is he treats his workers poorly. Folks say he has been through 2 other mail order arrangements before you. The first woman got here and found out he had lied about owning his business. Turns out, he just managed it for his uncle. She left on the next train. The second one stayed for 3 months, then ran off with a ranch hand. Elena took this in, trying to square it with the man who wrote letters about building a life together. He wrote such nice letters, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I imagine he did. Some men are better on paper than they are in person. Caleb pushed himself off the doorframe. I will let you work. Holler if you need anything. Alone in the kitchen, Elena found comfort in the rhythm of cooking. She fried the salt pork until it was crisp, then cooked some wild onions in the grease. Beans that had been soaking went into a pot with water and herbs. While it all simmered, she made biscuits from flour, lard, and buttermilk, her hands remembering what her mother had taught her. As she worked, a little girl named Mia wandered in, curious about everything. She was starved for a woman's company, asking where Elena was from, what Philadelphia was like, and if she knew any songs. Could you braid hair better than Papa? Papa tries, Mia said, sitting on a chair to watch Elena roll out biscuit dough. But his fingers are too big, and the braids always fall out. I could braid your hair tomorrow morning if you would like, Elena offered. Mia's face lit up with a joy so pure it made Elena's bruised heart feel a little bigger. This child wanted her here. Supper was ready as the sun went down. Elena called Caleb in from the barn and they sat at the rough table. The quiet rancher, his talkative little girl, and the woman who had been cast aside that very afternoon. Caleb took a bite of his beans and just stopped. He looked at Elena, his face full of surprise. This is good, he said. Really good. It is just beans and salt pork. It is the first meal I have had in 2 years that tasted like it was worth eating. He took another bite. We have been surviving on charred meat and burnt biscuits for a long while now. Mia nodded, her mouth full. Papa makes everything taste like smoke, she announced after she swallowed. I do not. You do, Papa. Even the eggs. Despite everything, Elena found herself smiling. There was something so normal about this, a child teasing her father over a shared meal. They ate in a comfortable silence after that. When they were finished, Elena stood up to clear the plates, but Caleb stopped her. You cooked. Mia and I will clean up. That is how it works here. So Elena watched as the big rancher and his little girl cleared the table. Mia stood on a stool to reach the wash basin, and Caleb dried. The simple, homey scene made Elena's eyes sting. She just did not understand any of this. When the kitchen was clean, Caleb sent Mia upstairs to bed. The little girl gave Elena a fierce, sudden hug that nearly knocked her over, then ran up the stairs like a happy little thunderstorm. Alone with Caleb again, Elena felt awkward. She was a stranger here, she reminded herself. Just an employee. You must be exhausted, Caleb said, seeming to read her mind. Tomorrow is soon. Enough to talk about work. Tonight, just rest. Thank you. Elena hesitated, then asked the question that had been sitting on her heart. Why did you help me? You do not know me. I could be anyone. Caleb thought on this, his gray eyes steady in the lamplight. My wife, he said at last. She came west as a mail-order bride, too. That is how we met. She arrived in town with nothing but a small bag and a lot of hope. Her intended had died from influenza 2 weeks before she got here. She was stranded, same as you. And if someone had not helped her... He trailed off. She was the best thing that ever happened to me. When I saw you on that platform today, I saw her. I saw what could have happened if nobody had stepped in to help. The words hung in the air between them. Elena finally understood. This was not just about kindness. It was about honor and a memory. I am sorry, she said softly. About your wife. Me too. Caleb turned away, but she saw the pain on his face. Get some rest. Morning comes early on a ranch. Elena climbed the stairs to her room. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed and looked out the window. There were more stars than she had ever seen in her life, scattered like tiny diamonds. Somewhere out there, Thomas Garrett was likely already forgetting about her, and the future she had dreamed of was gone. But here, in this small room, was a different kind of future. It was uncertain, built on a stranger's kindness. Elena knew this was not a fairy tale ending, but for tonight she had a roof over her head and the warmth of being treated with decency. For now, that was enough. It was more than enough. She lay down, and for the first time in a long time, fell asleep right away. She was lulled by the sounds of the ranch and the quiet footsteps of a man checking the locks before heading to his own lonely bed. The work would be hard, and the future was a mystery. But Elena Cross had survived the worst day of her life, and in doing so she had found the first small threads of what might one day feel like home, of cattle and the sound of birds singing from every direction. She lay there for a second, not knowing where she was in the dark before sunrise. Then it all came rushing back, the stage, the torn picture, the nasty look from Thomas Garrett. She sat up fast, trying to move away from the memory. Outside the window, the sky was just starting to lighten up from black to a deep blue. Elena got dressed in the dim light, picking out an old work dress. Her hands were shaking as she pinned up her hair. The woman in the little mirror looked worn out, with dark circles under her eyes. She quickly looked away. Downstairs, Caleb was already in the kitchen, wrestling with the stove. He looked like a man who had lost this fight many times before. He looked up, surprised, when she came in. "I did not expect you to be up so early," he said. "I am used to early mornings." Elena walked right over to the stove. "Let me—" She had a good fire crackling in just a few minutes, moving with the sureness that Caleb watched from the doorway. The kitchen started to warm up as she pulled out flour and eggs, taking stock of everything. "The coffee is in the blue tin," Caleb said. "Fair warning, I make it strong enough to float a horseshoe." "Strong is just fine," Elena replied. She found the coffee tin and began the familiar morning ritual. "When does Mia usually wake up?" "Depends," he said. "Sometimes with the sun, sometimes later. She'll be wanting you to fix those braids you promised her." His simple words landed with surprising weight. It was a small reminder that her promises mattered here now. She nodded and began slicing pork for their breakfast. The work felt good in her hands. As the sun spilled golden light into the kitchen, Caleb sat at the table with his coffee, and a comfortable silence settled between them. It was a peaceful moment, caught between yesterday's storm and whatever today might bring. Mia finally appeared, her hair a wild mess around her sleepy face. She crawled right into her father's lap and buried her face in his shirt. "Morning, little bird," Caleb murmured, his voice gentle. The little girl peeked at the table, then at Elena, as if to make sure she was real. "You stayed," she said. "I did," Elena answered with a small smile. "Good." Mia looked at her with an intensity that felt like a challenge. She wanted to know if Elena was a woman of her word. Elena had been dismissed on a train platform just yesterday, but this small girl was giving her a chance to prove her worth. The real test is never what others think of you, but what you do when someone finally believes in you. If you have ever felt overlooked, this story is for you. Elena met the little girl's gaze and sat her on a stool by the window. As she gently combed through Mia's tangled hair, she could hear Caleb starting the morning chores out in the barn. "My mama used to do this," Mia said in a small voice. "I was only 4.5 when she passed. I remember she smelled like fresh bread." The simple honesty of it made Elena's hands pause for just a moment. She resumed her work, her fingers weaving the dark strands together. "I lost my folks, too. I was 16. "Does it still hurt?" Mia asked. "Not like it used to," Elena said softly. "Papa gets sad. He tries to hide it, but his eyes get a faraway look." A little while later, Mia was staring at her reflection in the window glass, admiring 2 perfectly neat braids. She spun around, her face shining with a pure, simple joy that felt like a gift. "Can you do them every single morning?" she asked.
Elena just smiled. Let's go see that garden your papa told me about. The garden was in a sorry state. Weeds were choking the life out of the bean plants, and the squash vines were wilting on the cracked, dry earth. But Elena could see it was a good patch of land. Someone who knew what they were doing had laid it all out. Mama planted this, Mia said, as if reading her mind. Papa tries, but he says the plants don't like him. Elena knelt and felt the dusty soil. Plants don't have feelings like that, she explained. They just need a kind hand and a little attention. Your papa has been trying to do the work of 3 people. Something had to give. She looked around at the ranch. A fence was sagging here, a shutter hung crooked there. It was a good place that had seen hard times, but it was not broken beyond repair. Not yet. Can you fix it? Mia asked, her eyes full of hope. The garden, I mean. I can try, Elena said, meeting the child's serious gaze. But it's going to take a lot of work. I'm a good helper, Mia said proudly. So they started, Elena pulling weeds while Mia hauled a small bucket of water back and forth. Around mid-morning, Caleb appeared, his shirt dark with sweat. He stopped and stared at the neat row Elena had already cleared. I hired you for the house, not for field work, he said, his voice rough but not unkind. Elena sat back on her heels. It would be a shame to let all this go to waste, she said simply. He studied her for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. Water barrels out back. Holler if you need anything. As he turned to leave, Elena called out, Mr. Rowan, that name feels a bit stiff for folks living under the same roof. He shifted on his feet, a little uncomfortable. Caleb's fine. Then I'm Elena, she said, testing his name. I know, he said. And for a second she saw a flicker of humor in his eyes. You told me at the station. Mia giggled as he walked away. Papa's just shy, she whispered. By noon, the garden already looked better. Elena felt a deep satisfaction in her aching back and dirty hands. She was doing something useful. She was making a difference. Dinner was quiet. Caleb ate like a man who was more tired than hungry. Mia did all the talking, telling him about their day in the garden. Elena says the beans are just sad and we are going to make them happy again, she announced. You know about gardens? Caleb asked, looking at Elena. My mother taught me, she said. A garden is like anything else, I suppose. It responds to care. Sounds like raising a child, Caleb said quietly. Or building a life, Elena added, the words coming out before she could stop them. You can't just walk away from something and expect it to thrive. The words hung in the air between them. A look of understanding passed over Caleb's face. No, he said finally, his voice low. You can't. After dinner, while Elena cleaned, Mia practiced her letters on a small slate. Elena watched the little girl's fierce concentration. Do you go to school? She asked. Mia shook her head. Papa says it's too far. The last lady who tried to teach me said I was slow. May I see? Elena asked gently. She looked at the wobbly but clear letters on the slate. They showed effort and a real desire to learn. You are not slow at all, Elena said, her voice firm and kind. You just need a steady hand to guide you. Would you like me to help? Mia's face lit up with a hope that was brighter than the afternoon sun. Really? You would teach me? I am not a real teacher, Elena said with a small smile. But I can surely show you what I know. Elena was helping Mia practice her letters as the afternoon sun poured through the windows. It was quiet, satisfying work. The little girl was bright, soaking up every word like dry Texas earth in a summer shower. When Caleb returned, he just stood there in the doorway watching them. Elena looked up and saw an expression she couldn't quite figure out. It was a mix of thankfulness and old pain, as if seeing them together poked at a wound he'd long ignored. Time for chores, little bird, he said softly. Mia groaned but obeyed, sliding out of her chair. Can we do more letters tomorrow? She asked Elena. If your father doesn't mind. Caleb's voice was rough. I don't mind. Come on, Mia. Chickens need to be fed. Father and daughter headed outside, and Elena watched them from the window. The tall man and the small girl moved together toward the chicken coop. There was love in the way Caleb shortened his long stride to match hers, and in the way she looked up at him with total trust. Elena turned away, feeling an unexpected ache in her chest. She thought she was past wanting things for herself, past hoping for a real connection. But watching them stirred up a powerful longing to be a part of something. The evening was simple. After chores, they ate leftover cornbread and milk. Mia was tired out, and Caleb sent her to bed early. Elena could hear his deep voice upstairs reading a story, soon followed by Mia's happy giggles. When he came back down, Elena was finishing the dishes in the tidy kitchen. Caleb poured a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove and sank into a chair by the fireplace, the weariness of hard labor showing in his posture. She likes you, he said without any preamble. Elena dried her hands on a towel, unsure how to reply. She's a sweet child. She doesn't take to people easily, he said, staring into his coffee. Mrs. Patterson was here 3 months, and Mia never did warm to her. Losing her mother, it made her cautious. She doesn't trust that people will stick around. Can you blame her? The words came out before Elena could stop them. Caleb looked up at her, then nodded slowly. No, I can't. He paused for a moment. I want you to know you can stay here as long as you need to. Even if this arrangement doesn't work for you, I won't turn you out with nothing. Elena moved to the other chair, sitting down carefully as if a sudden move might shatter the moment. Why are you being so kind to me? It's not kindness. It's just human decency. His jaw set firm. What Garrett did yesterday, leaving you high and dry like that, was just plain cruel. I won't add to it. You barely know me. I know enough, he said, looking her right in the eye. I know you stood on that platform with half the town watching and you didn't fall apart. I know you've worked since sunrise without a single complaint. And I know my daughter hasn't smiled that much in 2 years. He paused. That's enough. Elena felt a tight knot of fear she'd been carrying in her chest finally begin to loosen. I won't take advantage of your generosity. Didn't figure you would. Caleb drained his coffee and stood up. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day. He headed upstairs, leaving Elena alone in the quiet kitchen. Through the open window, she could hear the night sounds of the ranch settling down. The sounds should have made her feel more alone, but instead they felt strangely comforting, like the land itself was breathing around her. She kept thinking about Mia's bright eyes over those neat braids and Caleb's rough around the edges kindness. She thought about how the garden seemed to thank her for a little water and care. A tiny hope started to grow, the idea that she had found a place where she was actually useful, where she added something instead of just taking up space. It surely was not the future she dreamed of 3 weeks ago on that train, but maybe it was better. It was real, built on hard work and a need for one another, not some storybook fantasy. Life settled into a steady rhythm. Elena would rise before the sun to get breakfast going while Caleb saw to the barn. Afterwards, she'd head to the garden or tackle the never-ending chores inside a house that had been neglected for 2 long years. Afternoons were for Mia's lessons and starting supper. The work was harder than anything she had ever known, but it gave her a satisfaction she had never felt before. Back east, her work was all about staying out of the way. Here, every chore she finished made a real, visible difference. The garden thrived, and the house slowly started to feel less like a shelter and more like a home. Caleb saw the changes she was making. He never said much, but she could see the quiet approval in his eyes. He was not a man for a lot of talk, communicating more with his quiet ways than with words, but Elena was learning his language. She saw the slight gentling of his eyes when he was pleased, and the hard set of his jaw when he was troubled. A week slipped by, and then another. The routine felt natural now. Elena found she was thinking less and less about Thomas Garrett and the shame of being left at that train station.
Out here with dirt on her hands and a purpose in her heart, it just did not seem to matter as much. She was building something, and that felt like a special kind of healing. It was Mia who finally asked the question that Elena had been pushing away. They were in the garden with Elena pulling weeds. Mia looked up from her watering can and asked, "Are you going to stay forever?" Elena's hand froze in the dirt. "I don't know, honey." This was only supposed to be for a little while. "But you like it here," Mia said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. "You smile more." The little girl's words caught Elena by surprise. She looked at Mia's sweet, serious face. "I do like it here an awful lot." "Then why would you leave?" It was a child's pure and simple logic. Elena fumbled for an answer that would not break the little girl's heart. "Well, darling, sometimes life is a whole lot more tangled up than just liking a place," she said softly. "I came here because I had nowhere else to turn. Your papa was kind enough to take me in, but that does not mean this is my home for good." "It could be," Mia insisted, setting her bucket down with a thud. "You could stay and be our family, like Mama was." The words hit Elena right in the chest. "Oh, sweetheart, it is not that easy." "Why not?" "Because your father needs a ranch hand, not a wife," Elena thought. "Because I learned the hard way not to wish for things that are too good to be true." But she could not say that to a 7-year-old girl who had already known so much loss. "We'll see," she said instead. Mia went back to her watering, but Elena caught the child stealing glances at her all afternoon, trying to figure her out. That evening, after Caleb tucked Mia into bed, Elena could hear their serious, soft voices through the floor. When Caleb came back downstairs, he stood with his back to her, looking out the dark window. "Mia asked you to stay," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." Elena put down the sock she was darning. "I told her the truth, that I just do not know." He turned around, his face full of worry. "She is getting attached. I should have seen it coming." "Should I keep my distance?" Elena asked. "Spend less time with her?" "No," he said, a little too quickly. "No, that would only hurt her more. She needs—" He trailed off, rubbing a hand through his hair. "She needs exactly what you have been giving her. Someone who pays her mind, who teaches her things. You are a good father, Caleb. That little girl worships you. She needs more than that. She needs a mother." The words came out rough, like they had been pulled from somewhere deep inside him. The kitchen was quiet for a long moment. Elena felt all the unspoken feelings hanging in the air between them, a messy knot of grief and need and simple loneliness. "I do not know how long I can stay," she said quietly. "But for as long as I am here, I will care for her the very best I can." Caleb gave a slow nod, and a little of the tension seemed to leave his shoulders. "That is all I am asking." But Elena had a feeling it was not all he was asking, just all he knew how to say. She saw it sometimes in the way he would look at her when he thought she was not paying attention. She saw it in the careful space he always kept between them. And she felt it too. A dangerous little hope that this temporary life could turn into something real, with this ranch, this child, and this quiet, steady man. 3 days later, the heat rolled in. It was not just hot, it was a heavy blanket that smothered the whole dang ranch. The air was thick and still when Elena woke up, and she knew it was going to be a bad one. Caleb came in from the barn looking grim. "It is going to be a scorcher," he said, taking the coffee she offered. "The cattle will need extra water. I will be out most of the day." "What about Mia?" "Keep her inside," he said. "This kind of heat can take down a grown man. You be careful, too." The garden could wait. After Caleb rode out, Elena gave the garden a quick watering before the sun got too high. The poor plants were already starting to wilt, their leaves curling up tight. By mid-morning, the house felt like a bread oven. Elena moved slow, saving her energy, while Mia lay on the cool part of the floor, too hot to do much of anything. The child's face was flushed and her dark hair was damp. "I am hot, Elena," she whined. "I know, sweetheart. Here, drink some more water." Elena watched to make sure she drank every last drop. Outside, the heat rose off the baked ground in wavy lines, making the whole world look blurry. Caleb came back at noon, his shirt soaked clean through with sweat, and his face flushed a deep red beneath his tan. He drank 3 full dippers of water without stopping, then poured another over his head. "How are you two holding up?" Elena asked, worried by how worn out he looked. "I've worked through worse," he said. But she noticed his hand tremble just a little as he set the dipper down. "We've got 2 cattle down with heat exhaustion." Caleb's voice was heavy. "Got 'em to some shade and water, but—" He didn't have to finish. Elena understood the hard truth of ranch life. You fight for every animal, but sometimes the fight is lost before it starts. He left without so much as a bite to eat, and Elena felt a knot of worry tighten in her stomach. The afternoon sun was only getting meaner. She tried to busy herself inside, but her eyes kept finding Caleb out in that blistering heat, a lone figure moving with a determination that defied the weather. Around 3 o'clock, Mia started to complain that her head hurt. Elena felt the little girl's forehead. It was warm, but in this heat, everything was warm. She made Mia drink a full glass of water and took her upstairs to lie down. "I don't want to rest," Mia mumbled, but her protest had no fight in it. "Just for a bit, sweet girl. Close your eyes." Elena sat by the bed, stroking Mia's damp hair. The child's flushed cheeks seemed too deep a red for just the heat. Elena told herself not to worry, but a cold unease was growing inside her. An hour later, Mia woke up crying. "My head hurts bad, and my tummy feels real funny," she whimpered. When Elena touched her forehead this time, there was no doubt. The girl was burning up with a fever that was climbing by the minute. "It's going to be all right, sweetheart," Elena said, her voice steady even as her own heart began to race. She knew how to care for the sick, but doing it alone on a remote ranch during a heat wave was a different story entirely. She changed Mia into a light nightgown and began sponging her down with cool water. Her mind ran through all the terrible possibilities. It could just be a summer fever, or it could be something much worse, the kind of sickness that stole children from their beds. "Where's Papa?" Mia asked, her voice small and shaky. "He's out working. He'll be back soon," Elena soothed, laying a cool cloth on her forehead. "You just rest now. I'm right here with you." The afternoon dragged on, a blur of shimmering heat and rising fear. Elena kept changing the cloths, but the fever would not break. Mia faded in and out, sometimes asking for water, other times whispering things that made no sense. Every time Elena touched Mia's forehead, the heat felt worse, a sure sign of a climbing fever. When Caleb finally walked in at sunset, weariness etched on his face. Elena met him on the stairs. Her voice was tight with worry. "It's Mia," she said straight out. "She's burning up." The color washed right out of Caleb's sun-browned face. He flew up the stairs and Elena was right behind him. The little girl was just a small lump under the sheet, her breaths coming quick and shallow. Caleb knelt by her bed, his big, rough hand shaking as it touched his daughter's cheek. "How long's she been like this?" His voice was raspy. "Since mid-afternoon. I've been trying everything, but I can't get it to break." Fear, the real kind, flashed in Caleb's eyes. It was the terror of a man who'd already lost so much and couldn't bear to lose more. "I got a ride for the doctor." Elena's mind raced. That was a 20-mile ride in the dark. How long would that take? 6, 7 hours, maybe, if I'm lucky, he said, already heading for the door. "That's too long," Elena said, the words tumbling out. "Caleb, look at her. She ain't got 6 hours." He turned, his face a picture of pure agony. "Then what do I do?" he pleaded. "Tell me what to do." Elena moved to the bed, gazing at Mia's flushed little face. Her skin was shiny in the lamplight, and the heat coming off her was just shocking. "We fight it right here," Elena said, her voice full of a resolve she didn't know she had. "We keep cooling her down. We get water in her whenever she can take it."
We don't stop, and we don't sleep." Caleb finished her thought, his voice grim. "And if she ain't better by sunup, I ride no matter what." They fell into a rhythm, working through the long night without a word. Elena would sponge Mia's hot skin while Caleb hauled buckets of cold water up from the well. When Mia stirred, they'd gently coax sips of water past her lips. The sounds of the ranch, a lowing cow, a horse stomping in the corral, seemed wrong, like the world shouldn't be so normal when a child's life was on the line. Around midnight, the fever spiked something awful. Mia started to shake with chills, her teeth chattering even in the suffocating heat of the room. Caleb paced the floor, his hands making fists at his sides. "This is how it started with Sarah," he said, his voice raw. "A fever that came on fast. 2 days later she was—" He couldn't say the words. Elena looked up from the bed. "This isn't the same, Caleb. Mia's a fighter." "You can't know that," he shot back. "No," she said, grabbing his hand. "But I can believe it, and you have to, too. She needs you to believe she can beat this." The fear in his eyes gave way to a hard determination. He knelt down beside Elena, placing his hand over hers on Mia's forehead. "Listen here, little bird," he whispered. "You're a rowan, and rowans don't you ever give up. Your mama never did, and you won't neither. You hear me?" Mia's eyes fluttered open for just a second. "Papa," she breathed, "I'm right here, darling, and I'm not going anywhere." The hours crawled by, a blur of cool cloths and worried whispers. Elena's whole body ached with exhaustion, but she pushed on, powered by pure will. Around 2 in the morning, she told Caleb to get some rest. "You'll be no good to her if you collapse," she insisted. "Just 1 hour." After he left, Elena found herself talking soft to Mia, telling her about the garden she'd had back home, and about all the things they would do once she was well. She spoke of how a person finds their home in the most unexpected places. "You have to stay with us," she whispered, wringing out a cloth. "Your daddy needs you. I need you." The strength of her own words caught her by surprise. When had this little girl become so important to her? Caleb came back exactly 1 hour later, looking tired but resolute. "Any change?" he asked. "Not yet, but she's holding on." They sat together in silence, a team bound by a shared fear and a single hope. As the first pale light of dawn crept into the room, Caleb's voice was low and heavy. "It's gone on too long. I'm riding for the doctor." But before he could stand, Mia stirred. Her eyes opened, and this time they were clear and focused. She looked at her father. "Papa, why are you in my room?" Caleb's hand flew to her forehead. His entire body went still. Then he slumped with a relief so deep it was hard to watch. "The fever," Elena breathed, feeling for herself. "It broke." Mia's skin was still warm, but the dangerous fire was gone. She was just a tired little girl. She blinked at their worn-out faces. "Did something bad happen? Y'all look scared?" "You were sick, little bird." Caleb's voice was thick with emotion. "Real sick. But you fought right through it." "I just remember feeling hot," Mia murmured, and Elena talking about gardens. Tears pricked Elena's eyes as she helped the girl sip some water. Soon Mia was asleep again, but this time it was a peaceful, healing sleep. They sat beside her, not wanting to leave, as if their presence alone kept her safe. "Thank you," Caleb said, his voice barely a whisper. "If you hadn't been here, if I'd been alone—" Elena took his hand. "But you weren't alone, and she is going to be just fine." Caleb looked down at their hands, then back to her face. In the early morning light, Elena could see the deep lines of exhaustion and fear that the long night had carved into him. But she also saw something new in his eyes, a recognition of what they had just been through together. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said, his voice rough. "When I saw her burning up like that, I just froze.
All I could think about was Sarah and how helpless I was. He swallowed hard. But you didn't freeze. You knew exactly what to do. You saved her. We saved her, she corrected softly. Together. The word hung between them, heavy with a meaning they weren't quite ready to face. They had fought side by side through the night, and in doing so, a line had been crossed. Elena was suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, his hand still holding hers in the quiet of the dawn. She knew she should pull away, but she didn't want to. "I need to tell you something," Caleb said, his gray eyes locked on hers. "These past few weeks, having you here, it's changed things. Mia ain't the only one who's grown attached." Elena's heart skipped a beat. "Caleb, please just let me finish," he said, taking a breath. "I know you only came here because you had nowhere else to turn. And I know this was supposed to be temporary. But somewhere along the line, it stopped feeling temporary to me. It started feeling like this could be something real." The words she had both hoped for and feared were now hanging in the air. "I don't have much to offer you," Caleb went on. "A hard life on a ranch a long way from anywhere. A man who's better with his hands than his words. And a little girl who needs more than I know how to give her." "It's everything," Elena whispered, the words coming straight from her heart. "Don't you see? This ranch, this child, you. It's everything I thought I'd lost for good. A purpose, a place to belong." Caleb's hand tightened on hers. "Then stay," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not as my hired help. Stay as my wife, as Mia's mother." The proposal was nothing like she'd ever dreamed of. It was raw and real, spoken by a man who knew what mattered. "People will talk," she said, testing the words. "They already do." "Let 'em talk," Caleb said firmly. "I don't give a damn about gossip. I care about building a life that's honest. You've worked harder than any person I've ever known. You've cared for my daughter like she was your own flesh and blood. You didn't run when things got tough. You stayed and you fought. That's all the proof I need." Elena looked at Mia, sleeping peacefully, her small face finally relaxed. She thought of the garden she had brought back to life, of the house that was slowly starting to feel like a home. She thought of Caleb's quiet strength and the way he had looked at her during that long, terrible night, as if she was the only thing holding their world together. "It won't be easy," she said softly, "building a marriage on hardship and need." "Nothing worthwhile ever is," Caleb answered, his other hand coming up to gently cup her face. "But I think we have something most folks don't start with. We've already seen each other at our worst, and we made it through." He was right. There would be no surprises down the road. They had already been tested by fire. "Yes," Elena said, her voice clear and strong. "Yes, I'll marry you." A wave of relief washed over Caleb's face. He leaned in slowly and gave her a kiss that wasn't about passion, but about promise. When he pulled back, Mia's eyes were open, and she was watching them with a sleepy little smile. "I knew it," she mumbled, her voice still tired. "I told Papa you should stay forever." "You're supposed to be asleep," Elena said, her own voice full of a joy she couldn't hide. "I am sleeping," Mia whispered, her eyes drifting shut again. "This is just a really good dream." For the first time, Elena heard Caleb laugh, a real, honest sound that surprised her. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders and they sat together, watching Mia sleep as the sun rose higher, bringing the promise of a new day. The heat would come again, and the work would be waiting. But in that moment, with a new beginning ahead of them, Elena felt nothing but peace. Life can throw a person a curveball, leaving them stranded and alone. But sometimes that's right where they need to be to find a true home. For Elena Cross, that home was taking shape. She watched over the sleeping child, Mia, and the quiet man who would soon be her husband, feeling a peace she had not known in years. This wasn't the life she had planned, but it was real.
As the sun came up, casting a golden glow over the small room, she knew, deep in her bones, that she was exactly where she belonged. They let the little girl rest. Caleb finally got to his feet, his joints popping from sitting so long. He looked at Elena with a mix of gratitude and wonder. "I should go check on the cattle," he said, his voice low. "Make sure the heat didn't take any more of them." "And I need to get some breakfast going," Elena replied, standing up slowly. "You have not eaten since yesterday." They walked down to the kitchen together. The air between them felt different now, filled with unspoken truths and a quiet hope. Caleb paused at the door, holding his hat. "We should get married soon," he said. "No sense in waiting." Elena turned from the stove. "People will talk, saying we rushed it." "Folks are going to talk no matter what we do," Caleb answered, his gaze steady. "Might as well give them something real to talk about, unless you need more time to be sure." "I am certain." The words came out firm, surprising even her. It was not the certainty of a grand passion. It was the certainty of knowing what was solid and real and choosing to build a life on that rock. A look of relief washed over Caleb's face. "Saturday, then. That gives us 5 days. I will ride to town tomorrow and speak with the minister." "I will need a dress," Elena said, looking down at her worn clothes. "There is fabric in the trunk upstairs," Caleb offered. "My Sarah bought it. She never had the chance to use it. It is a nice cream color with little flowers. You could make something with it." It was a heavy offer, using his late wife's fabric. But Elena understood what he was truly saying. He was giving her permission to make something new from a future that never came to be. "I would be honored," she said softly. After Caleb went out, Elena stood in the quiet kitchen. Her life was changing faster than a prairie fire. Just a month ago, she was in Philadelphia. Now she was about to marry a man she barely knew and become a mother to a child who had stolen her heart. She should have been scared, but instead, a deep calm settled over her. She was done fighting her circumstances. She was ready to embrace them. By noon, Mia was awake and asking for water and bread, her fever gone. "Papa says you are going to be my real mama," Mia said, taking a small bite. Elena sat on the bed. "If that is all right with you. I know I can never replace your mother." "I do not remember her much," Mia said with the simple honesty of a child. "I just know the house feels warmer when you're here. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Elena said, her heart swelling. "I promise to do my best for you." "You already are," Mia whispered, her eyes closing again. "I'm glad you got left on the platform." Tears welled in Elena's eyes. "No, sweetheart, that is not bad to say at all." The next few days were a blur of preparation. Caleb came back from town saying the minister would be there on Saturday. He had also stopped at the general store and brought back a spool of white ribbon for Mia's hair, something Elena had mentioned offhand. The small gesture meant more to her than any expensive gift could. It showed he was listening. It showed he cared. Those were the things a real marriage was built on. She found the fabric in the trunk. It was just as he had described, a soft cream cotton with tiny blue flowers. Sarah must have been planning a special dress. Elena felt a pang of sadness for the woman she would never know. She ran her fingers over the fine material. "Thank you," she whispered. "I promise I will take good care of them." That night she began cutting the fabric by lamplight. Caleb came and stood in the doorway, just watching her work. "Sarah would have liked that," he said after a while. "She did not believe in wasting anything good." "Tell me about her," Elena asked, looking up. He sat down in the chair across from her. It took him a moment to find the words. "She was strong," he began, his voice rough with memory. "Came out here by herself. Her intended died, so she married a stranger, me. She could have been bitter, but she chose to build something with me instead." He paused. "It was not a love match. Not at first. That grew later, over years of hard work. But we started with respect and trust. That turned out to be enough to build everything else on."
Elena understood he was telling her their own story. He was showing her how love could be built from the ground up. "She sounds like a wonderful woman," Elena said. "She was," Caleb agreed, his gray eyes meeting hers. "And so are you." "I am not trying to replace her, Elena. I want to build something new with you." "I know," she said, setting down her scissors. "I am not trying to be her. I am trying to make my own place here." "You already have," he said, getting up to leave. "The house feels like a home again. Mia is laughing. And when I come in from the fields, it feels like I am coming home, not just coming back to more work." After he left, Elena held the half-finished dress in her lap. This was the life they were building. It was not a romance from a storybook. It was something better. It was a partnership, a home, built on honesty and the simple choice to be there for each other day after day. And she knew she could thrive in a life like that. The dress was finished in 3 days. It was simple, but it was made with care, ready for a new beginning. On Friday afternoon, a wagon appeared down the road from town, kicking up dust. Elena watched from the garden as it got closer. She recognized Henry from the general store, but beside him sat a woman in a blue dress. They pulled up near the house just as Caleb came out of the barn. "Afternoon, Caleb," Henry called. "Heard there's going to be a wedding tomorrow. Thought we'd come by with our good wishes." The woman, who Elena figured was his wife, was already walking toward the garden. She looked to be about 50, with knowing eyes that took in everything. "You must be Elena," she said, holding out her hand. "I'm Catherine. Henry told me all about what happened when you got here. Thomas Garrett should be ashamed of himself." Elena shook her firm hand, surprised by her directness. "Thank you. It wasn't the arrival I had planned." "I imagine not," Catherine said, "but it looks like things have worked out." She glanced toward the house, then back at Elena. "Caleb's a good man, deep, quiet, but good. And that little girl has needed a mother. You'll have your hands full, but you'll do just fine." It wasn't a flowery welcome, but it was an honest one, and Elena found she liked it, more than she would have hollow praise. "I am willing to work," she said simply. "Then you'll fit right in out here," Catherine said, reaching into a basket she carried. "I made you a wedding cake. It's nothing fancy, but every bride deserves something sweet on her day." The unexpected kindness made Elena's throat tighten. "You didn't have to do that." "Of course I didn't. I wanted to." Catherine's expression softened. "We're not a big community out here. We take care of our own. And you're one of us now, whether the wedding's happened yet or not." Henry and Caleb had walked over to the garden, talking quietly. Elena could see Caleb start to relax a little. When they finally shook hands, Henry clapped him on the back with real warmth. "We'll be here tomorrow, 2 o'clock sharp," Henry said, loud enough for all to hear. "Catherine and I, and we'll bring the Johnsons if they're up for it. Every wedding needs witnesses." After they left, Caleb stood watching the wagon go. "Didn't expect that," he said when Elena joined him. "Neither did I. I thought the town would be—" She trailed off. "Hostile." Caleb's mouth twisted. "Some will be. Martha and her crowd will have plenty to say, but Henry and Catherine, the Johnsons, they're good people. They'll stand by us." "That's all we need, then." Elena slipped her hand, a feeling that was starting to feel right. His calloused hand was warm and gentle around hers. "You getting cold feet about tomorrow?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm scared spitless," she admitted. "But not about marrying you. It is just being a wife and a mother out here." He turned to her, his gray eyes looking right through her. "Elena, I need you to hear me. I am not a man who says pretty things. I will probably make you mad more than I make you happy. This life is harder than a $2 steak, but I will show up every single day. I will work beside you, and I will be the best husband and father I know how to be. I will always be honest. I will provide for you, and I will stand with you. That is my promise. Is that enough for you?" She looked at this good, steady man who had given her a home when she had nothing. "It is more than enough," she whispered. It is everything that matters. The wedding day started clear and hot, the sky a bright blue that promised a real scorcher. Elena was up before the sun, her stomach doing flip-flops. Today she was going to be Elena Rowan, a wife and a mother tied to this land and these folks for good. She slipped into the new dress she had finished sewing just that morning. It was a simple cream fabric with tiny blue flowers, practical but pretty enough for a wedding. Mia burst into the room, her eyes wide with excitement. "You look like a queen!" Elena just laughed. "I look like a woman in a new dress, is what?" "Can I wear my blue ribbon? The one Papa bought me?" "Of course, sweetheart. Come here and let me fix it in your hair." As she braided Mia's hair, Elena saw Caleb in the yard. He was in his Sunday clothes, dark trousers, and a crisp white shirt. He looked about as comfortable as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs, but my goodness, he was a handsome man. Her heart gave a little jump she was not expecting. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, their small group had gathered. Henry and Catherine showed up first, then a couple named Johnson, weathered ranchers just like them. The preacher from town arrived last, a thin man with kind eyes. They all stood on the porch to catch what little breeze there was. It was not a big church wedding with flowers and music. It was just a few people watching two others promise to build a life. The preacher spoke about partnership and sticking together through the hard times. He talked about commitment, not love, as if he knew this was a practical match. Then it was time. Caleb took Elena's hands in his. "I, Caleb Rowan, take you, Elena Cross, to be my wife. I promise to provide for you, to protect you, and to stand by you no matter what comes our way." When her turn came, Elena's voice was steady. "I, Elena Cross, take you, Caleb Rowan, to be my husband. I promise to work beside you, to care for your home and your daughter. I will stand by you through whatever comes. I promise to honor you, be faithful, and build a life with you. From this day forward, I will be a true wife." Their vows were plain and simple, focused on the real life they were choosing. The minister declared them man and wife, and Caleb gave Elena a gentle kiss, sealing their promise. Mia cheered as their little group clapped. Catherine brought out a cake, and they shared it on the porch with fresh lemonade. It was a small celebration, but full of genuine joy and relief. Catherine pulled Elena aside. "You chose a good man. Caleb can weather any storm, and that little girl needs you." "I need them too," Elena admitted. "That is how the best marriages are built," Catherine said, squeezing her arm. "You will do just fine, dear. Just remember to keep showing up, even on the hard days." As afternoon wore on, the guests left. Mia, tired from the excitement, went for a nap, leaving the new couple alone in the kitchen. The reality of their new life settled in the quiet. "Well," Caleb finally said, "we are married." "We are," Elena replied, feeling suddenly shy. They had lived in the same house for weeks, but this felt different. This was real. Caleb must have sensed her unease. "Nothing has to change tonight," he said softly. "You can keep your room. Take your time." It was a kind offer, but Elena shook her head. "I do not need time. I meant every promise I made today." Something in Caleb's face softened. He stepped closer, his rough, hard-working hands gently cupping her face. "I will do right by you," he promised. "I will be a good husband." "I know," she said. And she truly did. She felt a deep certainty in the goodness of the man she had married. Their second kiss was deeper than the first, full of promise. When he pulled away, Elena felt a missing piece of her heart click right into place. That night, Elena moved her things from the small storage room into the big bedroom Caleb had lived in alone for 2 years. The room still held small reminders of Sarah, like a brush on the dresser. But Caleb had worked hard to make space for Elena. "If there is anything you want changed, you just tell me," he said. "This is your room now, too. You are home." Those 2 words, "you are home," hit Elena with a surprising force. After feeling lost for so long, standing in this room with her new husband while Mia slept down the hall, she finally felt like she belonged. "It already feels like home," she whispered. And when Caleb pulled her close that night, Elena knew she had been given a rare gift. It was not the life she had dreamed of on the train, but something solid and real. It was a second chance from a man who saw her at her lowest and chose her anyway. As the crickets sang outside, Elena Rowan closed her eyes and finally felt at home. The first weeks of their marriage fell into a natural rhythm. Waking up next to Caleb and sharing coffee in the quiet before dawn felt like it was always meant to be. The summer heat finally broke in mid-August, and the cooler mornings brought a feeling of settling down, like their roots were digging deep into the land. One morning, Ellen awoke to find Caleb already at the window, watching the sun rise over the mountains. She watched this quiet man who was her husband. "You are up early, even for you," she said. He turned with a small smile. "Could not sleep. Been thinking about how much has changed in 2 months." He sat on the edge of the bed. "When I first saw you on that platform, I never imagined this." He meant the room, the house, the new life they were building. Elena took his hand. They had grown more comfortable with small touches like this. "I never imagined I would feel this way again," he said. "Like I have a future to look forward to, not just a life to get through." His thumb drew circles on her palm. "You and Mia, you all gave me that." His honesty made her heart ache in a good way. "You gave me a place to belong," she said, leaning against him. "A reason to believe I was worth something." "You were always worth more than that," Caleb said, his voice firm. "That man is a fool." They sat together in the growing light, enjoying the peace before the day's work began. But that peace was shattered later that morning. As Elena tended her garden, a rider appeared on the road. Her stomach twisted when she recognized the fancy horse. It belonged to Thomas Garrett. She froze as he rode closer, the old shame washing over her. She had not seen him since that terrible day at the station. And now here he was, riding onto her land. No, she corrected herself, it was Caleb's land. Garrett pulled his horse to a stop near the garden, looking her over in a way that made her skin crawl. He had gained some weight. "Mrs. Rowan," he said, his voice dripping with smugness, "I heard you landed on your feet. Made quite a quick recovery." Elena stared back at him, refusing to let him see the anger boiling inside her. "Mr. Garrett, what in the world brings you out this far? Just here to see Caleb about some feed for the ranch." Garrett climbed down from his horse, slow and awkward like a man who did not belong in a saddle. He looked at Elena with a smug pity that made her skin crawl. "I was just curious," he said, "wanting to see how you were making out." He was looking down on her like a prize he'd been generous enough to throw away. Before Elena could find her words, Caleb's voice cut through the air, hard as in winter frost. "Garrett, did not figure on seeing you." Caleb walked up from the barn, and the look in his eyes was pure, quiet fury. It was a side of him Elena had never seen. "I came about that feed order," Garrett stammered, his smile fading under Caleb's cold stare. "We can talk about it down at the barn," Caleb said, his voice flat. "No need to bother my wife." The way he said "my wife" was a clear line drawn in the dirt. Garrett's face tightened. He looked back at Elena, his eyes lingering in a way that felt like a trespass. "You are looking good, Elena. Ranch life must suit you." "My wife is doing just fine," Caleb said, stepping right between them, a solid wall of protection. "Now, if you want to talk business, we will do it away from the house." He turned and headed for the barn, not waiting for an answer. Garrett followed him like a dog with its tail between its legs. Elena watched them go, her heart pounding. She went back to her garden, pulling weeds with a vengeance, her eyes glued to that barn. After about 20 minutes, the men came out. Garrett looked mad enough to spit nails. He got on his horse and rode off fast, kicking up a cloud of dust. Caleb walked back over to her. "What did you say to him?" she asked. "I told him his prices were too high," Caleb said, his jaw set hard. "I also told him if he ever looked at you or spoke to you with anything but respect again, he would have to answer to me. And I made it clear I was not kidding." A warmth spread through Elena's chest. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, ma'am, I did." Caleb looked her square in the eye, his gaze fierce. "You're my wife, Elena. What that man did was wrong, and I'll be damned if he thinks he can show his face here and cut you down. Not on my land." Elena gently touched his arm. "Our land." A smile touched Caleb's lips. "Yeah, our land." He pulled her into a strong embrace, and she leaned against him, feeling steady again. "You okay?" he asked. "I am now." And she truly was. Seeing Garrett stirred up old ghosts, but they had no power over her anymore. She was not that lost woman he had left behind. She was Elena Rowan, a wife and a mother, building a life with her own two hands. That man's visit was a strange gift. It showed her how much had changed. Her days were now filled with purpose, tending the garden until it overflowed and canning the bounty for the winter ahead. Each sealed jar was a testament to their future. Mia was blossoming too, learning to read and sew, soaking up every lesson like a dry sponge in the rain. Watching that little girl thrive brought a deep, quiet joy Elena had never known. Late one September afternoon, while they were putting up applesauce, Mia looked up from the big pot. "Can I call you Mama?" she asked. Elena's hands stopped their work. "Is that what you would like, sweet girl?" Mia nodded, her little face all serious. "I know you are not my real mama, but you feel like one. You teach me things, and you took care of me when I was sick. That is what mamas are for, right?" "That is exactly what they are for." Elena knelt down and took the child's sticky hands in hers. "I would be so proud if you called me Mama." A huge grin broke across Mia's face. "For real? With all my heart." The little girl launched herself into Elena's arms, holding on tight. In that moment, Elena felt something shift inside her. She was a mother, not by blood, but by love and by choice. When Caleb walked in, Mia ran to him, shouting, "Papa, I get to call her Mama now!" The look of pure, quiet joy on Caleb's face was all the thanks Elena would ever need. This new family had been built not on duty, but on a love that had grown slow and steady. Later that night, with Mia asleep, Caleb held Elena close. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for loving my girl." "She is easy to love," Elena said softly. "Both of you are." He held her tighter. "I never figured I would have this again. A real family, a home that feels warm." "Me neither," she admitted, turning to see his face in the moonlight. "When Thomas Garrett left me standing there, I thought my life was over. Turns out it was just beginning." "His loss was my gain, that is for sure," Caleb said, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "Best thing that ever happened to me was you being on that platform when I rode into town." Their love was quiet and deep, an unspoken understanding that had grown out of a simple arrangement. It was not a fairy tale romance. It was something stronger, built on respect and shared days. Lying there with him, Elena marveled at the crooked path her life had taken. What felt like ruin was actually her rescue. With Garrett, she would have had a life with a mean, small-minded man. Instead, she had Caleb, a good and honorable man who felt things deeply, even if the words came hard. "Caleb," she said into the dark, "I have to tell you something." "What is it?" "I love you." The words were simple and true. "I do not know how it happened. Maybe when you stood up for me, or when we got Mia through that fever. But it is true. I love you for the man you are." The silence that followed was so long it scared her. Then his arms crushed her to him, and his voice was thick with feeling when he finally spoke. "I love you too, Elena. Lord knows I tried not to. I told myself this was just an arrangement. But you are not just a help to me. You are everything. You make this whole world better just by being in it." They clung to each other, two lost souls who had found their way home by accident, and then decided to stay on purpose. The coyote's song out on the plains felt a long way off. In their home, built from the scraps of their old lives, there was only warmth and the feeling of being right where they belonged. Winter hit them hard that year, testing their grit. The days were long and cold, but the nights were warm. They would sit by the fire, Mia working on her letters while Elena sewed and Caleb carved little animals from wood. Soon, Elena started selling her extra preserves and eggs at Henry's store. It was not much money, but it was hers, earned by her own hands. The first thing she bought was fabric for new dresses for Mia, and the girl's joy was worth more than any coin. But a trip to town always meant risking a run-in with someone like Martha. Sure enough, she was waiting outside the general store, her eyes narrowed. "Well, Mrs. Rowan," Martha sneered. "I see you are still playing house out at the Rowan place." "I am not playing," Elena said, her voice steady. "I am building a life." "With his daughter, you mean?" Martha shot back with a nasty laugh. "The whole town knows you only got here because Thomas Garrett threw you away." Elena stood her ground, looking that woman right in the eye. "Yes, they know I was left with nothing, but they also know Caleb gave me a chance. They know I have worked hard and made a good home for that little girl. If you want to find something ugly in that, it says a whole lot more about you than it does about me." With that, she walked right past Martha and into the store, her head held high. Henry, the storekeeper, gave her a nod of respect from behind the counter. "Heard that, Mrs. Rowan. Well said." The woman's bitter words barely stung. Elena had learned that some folks are just determined to be sour. Their opinions could not change the truth of her life. The satisfaction of a job well done, Mia's loving hugs, and Caleb's steady presence. When spring finally came, it felt like a reward. The garden, once a sad, neglected patch, was now bursting with life. Elena planted wildflowers along the porch, a splash of color that promised an even brighter future. She watched the crops grow with a deep sense of pride. Mia turned 8 that spring. They celebrated with a cake Elena baked herself. The little girl was no longer the shy, wounded child Elena had first met. She was confident and happy, filled with the kind of joy that comes from knowing you are loved and safe. "Look at her," Caleb said one afternoon, watching Mia chase chickens. "It is hard to believe she is the same little girl. She just needed to know we were not going anywhere." Elena leaned against his shoulder, a simple comfort she had grown to cherish. "Kids need that," she said. "Grown-ups do too," Caleb added quietly. "You have given me that. Knowing you will be here. Knowing we are building something that is going to last." One day, about a year after she arrived, Caleb came in from the barn looking thoughtful. "I want to show you something." He led her up a small hill that overlooked the whole ranch, the house, the barn, the pastures stretching out before them. I have been thinking about expanding the house, maybe building a new workshop. We can afford it now." He paused, looking at her seriously. "But this is your home, too. I wanted to know what you would want." The question stole her breath. He was not just asking her opinion. He was telling her that this was her place, that their future was something they would build together. "A bigger kitchen," she said after a moment, "and a schoolroom for Mia, with shelves for her books." "A schoolroom," Caleb repeated, nodding. "I like that. I could build her a proper desk." They stood there on that hill planning their future, their shoulders touching. Elena thought about the scared woman who had arrived on a train platform a year ago thinking her life was over. She never could have imagined this, never dreamed that one man's rejection would lead her to a place where she was truly valued. "Are you happy, Elena?" Caleb asked. "Truly happy?" She turned and took both his hands. "I am happier than I ever knew I could be. This life, this family, you, it is everything, even though this is not what you planned." She smiled, a real smile that reached all the way to her eyes. "What I planned was a silly girl's dream. What I found here is real. It is solid and true, built on honest work and a real partnership." Caleb pulled her into a hug, and they stood there while the spring breeze whispered through the grass. In the distance, they could hear Mia singing in the garden. "Thank you," Caleb said softly, "for taking a chance on us." for staying. Thank you for seeing me when I felt like no one else did, Elena whispered back. For loving me. You were never a reject, he said, kissing her gently. You were a blessing that fool was too blind to see. My blessing. They walked back to the house holding hands, and Elena felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She had come to this place as a stranger, a mail-order bride. Now she was Elena Rowan, a wife, a mother, and an equal partner. The summer stretched out ahead, promising hard work and long, hot days. But Elena was not afraid. She knew they would face whatever came together. Strength, she had learned, was not about avoiding trouble. It was about walking through it with people you love, building a life from the ground up. That night, with Mia asleep and the house quiet, Elena looked out the window at the moonlit land. Caleb came and wrapped his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how different everything is," she said, leaning back against him. "I am so grateful that Thomas Garrett tore up my picture and walked away." "His loss was my gain," Caleb murmured. "Our gain," Elena corrected him. "It was a gain for all of us. And it all happened because one man was cruel, and you decided to be kind." They stood there together in the moonlight, a family made not by blood, but by choice. The widowed rancher, the rejected bride, and the motherless child had all found their home in each other. The woman left on a dusty train platform with nothing had found everything that mattered. She learned that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you is the very thing that opens the door to the best time of your life. Rejection is not the end. Sometimes it is just the beginning. And home is not a place you find. It is a place you build with your own two hands right alongside the people who choose to build it with you. And right there, under that big Montana sky, Elena knew she was finally completely home. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.